Welcome out to another episode of Tax Sale Titans. This is episode number 26. I'm Ferre, here with Steve Swenson, and we've got some interesting things we're going to be covering tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit about the state of Florida. So, this is May 6th today, and Florida is kind of getting right into the middle of their tax lien season. They always have tax deeds that are available, but their tax lien auctions typically happen right around now. So we're going to get a chance to check out some of those. We're also going to look at some results that happened in Florida here over the last few months. In fact, it's kind of surprising. I've heard plenty of people say that there's no money to be made in Florida, and I think in some counties that actually might be true, but not everywhere. There are lots of parts of Florida where there are still good deals to be had, and so we're going to review some of those today as well. And after that, we're going to go and look at some of the lien auctions that are already opened up and some of the liens that are currently available.
Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be a little bit different. It's all going to be about Florida this week, and we think that there's some reasons why. Like Shade talked about, there's some great opportunities even in the tax deed market, and it's the tax lien season in Florida. So there's a ton of different opportunities, and we want you guys to understand exactly how Florida works and how you can take advantage of that state if you'd like to invest there.
Yeah. We also just want to give a special shout out to all of our members, the coaching members and our program members. We really enjoy working with all of our coaching members so much. The chance to kind of help them find deals and work through and evaluate what they're doing. It's something we enjoy doing, and we're happy to have all of you with us. And that also includes just our regular website members, our YouTube members, everybody that's been following us on for videos for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you guys coming to us to learn more about tax sale investing. So we want to thank all of you guys for supporting us and learning about tax liens and deeds with us. So we're going to talk about Florida tax sales, like we mentioned. We're going to go through how Florida works. We're even going to get a little bit into the history and how Florida sells both tax liens and tax deeds. Really, when I was looking at it, they have been doing this, Shade, selling tax liens and tax deeds since about the 1930s. In fact, we even have some tax lien certificates from like 1936 and 37 that we have framed in our office, that have different old Florida tax liens and tax deeds. And so it's kind of interesting to understand this isn't something new. This has been something that's really been going on for almost 200 years in one form or another.
Yeah, I think they've always, at least for the last 25, 30 years, they've certainly had the best system. And I think that even throughout the 80s and 90s, they had a really good system in place here compared to most states. And it was confusing for a long time. I would say for a long time, Florida was one of the more confusing states to try to figure out. And that was because they seemed to offer liens and they offered deeds, and it didn't really make sense as to what they were. But today, they're what we would call a tax deed application state. And what that means is there's states that offer tax liens and tax deeds. There's only a couple of them now. Colorado is another one that is now a state, a tax deed application state. But Florida has always led the country when it came to their both online records and with their online tax sales. They were the ones doing tax sales earliest online, and they were the first ones that really had the good comprehensive online records as well. And of course, the real estate market there is also very strong.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for whatever reason, Florida real estate still looks strong in a lot of different areas. But to get into history a little bit, as I mentioned, they started offering tax liens almost 100 years ago. It started in the mid-1930s. They were doing, tax lien certificates, and they had problems with, widespread delinquency. And so they passed a couple of laws to kind of figure it out. And then by 1934, they amended their original constitution to include tax deeds. So, they had a bunch of tax liens that weren't getting purchased because they didn't have investors that were going there to the auction. So the county had all of these tax liens and they didn't know what to do with them because there just wasn't the amount of investors going to the auction. And that's where they figured out, well, let's go ahead and create a tax deed application so we don't have 7 or 10 years worth of back tax liens that are just sitting with nobody ever doing anything with this property.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what they needed was the power to foreclose on the properties. just certain lien states that the county doesn't necessarily have the power to foreclose. Like in most of your Arizona stuff, the county never really foreclosed on that stuff until now. Now they do eventually here with a lot of the liens, like with some of the sales that we see where they do offer up deeds. But for a lot of counties, though, it's a major problem. So yeah, that gave them the power to foreclose on properties, and that is kind of where they fix a lot of those problems here with their auction. So the way that it works is first off, every May, Florida holds their tax lien auction. And their tax lien auction, they offer up every county offers up liens. Those liens come with a 2-year redemption period, and they pay out a maximum rate of return of 18%. And they usually all sell them by, by interest rate. So bidders basically bid down the interest rate to win the sales. However, as those liens are sold, most of the liens are going to redeem. And when that happens, nothing really needs to happen. Essentially, the county is just able to cut a check to the investor for what they paid plus the interest rate that they're owed. However, if that redemption period expires in Florida, then what happens is the lien holder can fill out a tax deed application, and that tax deed application prompts a judicial foreclosure on the property. So as soon as that application is filled out, the county will execute a foreclosure on the property. So basically notifications will go out and the property will be foreclosed on, and it'll be offered up at a tax deed auction from there, starting amount with what's total owed in taxes and fees. So essentially, as soon as that property gets the opening bid amount in the deed auction, that's set up to pay off the lien holder for everything they're owed, plus any interest that they're owed as well. But essentially, though, that's how they essentially pay off lien holders, is by selling the properties as deeds at auction. It kind of guarantees that the lien is going to redeem in every case. So it means that for lien holders, you're never really going to get the property in Florida, but you're also always going to at least get your money back plus your interest rate return.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a little bit different system than a lot of states, but I think it's an effective system. In fact, I heard a lot of investors complaining when Colorado just recently changed their law to do a system similar to this. And for me, in Shade's standpoint, that just gives us more opportunity to be able to acquire the property. I think we still have some more slides to go through, Shade.
Oh, pass it back to me then. Sorry, I thought we were jumping over here. All right,
no.
Here we go. Let me set my screen up here.
Yeah, we're going to go through and talk about more detail on the tax lien process and then the tax deed process. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jump over and look at some live examples. So one thing to remember about Florida tax liens is the auctions are going to be held in the month of May. Sometimes they'll go into the first part of June, but that's kind of when all of the counties are going to be holding their auctions. So we know each May, that's when the auctions are going to take place. Now, Shade kind of mentioned this, but they use a bid down the interest rate method to be able to sell the tax lien, meaning that they're going to start at 18%. Whoever's willing to accept the lowest bid will go ahead and be the tax lien certificate winner. Now, they do start at an 18% interest rate, which ends up being about 1.5% per month. Some people are under the assumption that 18% is going to be applied or paid regardless of when they redeem. No, you're going to be earning 1.5% per month. So if it was 6 months, you would earn 9% return on that.
Yeah, and the increments are always down by 0.25% rates. Now, as we were saying, all Florida tax liens are sold with a 2-year redemption period. Following that 2-year redemption period, the lien holder can fill out a tax deed application, which that is what initiates this foreclosure process. When they fill that out, the county will execute a foreclosure. They schedule a tax deed auction where the property can be sold to investors there in the public. But as soon as that minimum bid is met, then the lien itself and the liens are paid off. Anything above that lien amount, though, anything above the opening bid amount is the surplus. And that essentially is supposed to go to pay off other liens, and then anything that's left over from there is supposed to go back to the original owner.
Yeah, exactly. So they have a 2-year redemption period. Anytime after that 2 years, the lien holder can go ahead and start the foreclosure process. Now, they're going to have up to a total of 7 years before that lien will no longer be valid. Now, one thing to talk about, and this is one thing that investors have loved about Florida is they have what's called a 5% penalty. And what this means is that regardless of how low you bid that down, when if it redeems within the first year, you're going to be guaranteed at least a 5% penalty interest. So if it redeemed the next month, you're not going to only earn 1.5%, you're actually going to earn 5% or 6.5%, including that 1.5%. And so this is part of the reason why Florida is so attractive, is because of this. And really the biggest risk with Florida is tax lien roll-up.
You know, that 5% minimum is really what attracted a lot of the big financial investors that came out there. You know, they would spend hundreds of millions of dollars in these lien auctions to buy up liens because they know that a certain percentage of the liens are going to redeem quickly. They're going to earn, you know, that minimum 5% on it, and that they're eventually, if they keep buying the liens, they'll be able to buy liens there at basically get the first option to buy liens where they'll make the full 18% on it, which is even better for them. And so, yeah, it's attracted a lot of investors, and the roll-up is an issue. Although what you're going to find as we look at different liens today is that the vast majority of tax liens are really good investments. It's actually hard to find a bad tax lien when you're dealing with the wholesale.
Yeah. Now, as far as the tax lien auctions, most of the counties in Florida have moved over to online auctions. In fact, as I was going through it today, I don't know if there might be a couple of counties, we'll have to go through and look completely, that aren't still doing on-site auctions, but most of them are either using Real Auction, Lien Hub, or tax certificate sale, kind of abbreviated as you can see there, to be able to sell their tax lien certificates.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, they pretty much all are online. All of their deed auctions. So once the tax sale has been sold, tax lien has been sold, and that 2-year redemption period has passed. So the investor basically has to wait out the 2 years, but you can't wait any more than 7. So there's a 5-year period of time there, you know, where some investors, if they don't take action, the past due taxes can just sit there and accrue, and you can get year after year after year of taxes that are owed. That's kind of where the roll-up issue you know, lies. If an investor simply pursues foreclosure after 2 years, there is a very limited amount of roll-up. I mean, really what it means is if after 2 years there can only be a couple of liens that have been issued against the property, so it limits how much the investor would need to pay in order to foreclose. But once that has expired, the tax deed application is what they're going to fill out. And it's actually at the time they fill out that tax deed application that the county would make them pay any other, you know, taxes that are owed in order to foreclose. So that's where the investor, if they've only purchased one lien at that time, they'll probably invest additional money into the property, you know, to pay off the foreclosure cost of the property, which is basically paying off all the liens that would exist against the property to send it to the deed sale.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say that we bought a 2023 lien, and that was a first-year lien, and you know, and now we went to go foreclose. It's been 3 years. We would have to pay off the 2025 and the 2026 lien, and essentially once we foreclose on those, that time between when you filled out the tax deed application and paid those additional liens until when it goes to the actual foreclosure sale, you're going to be earning 18% off of that that amount. So let's say you bought $1,000 lien, you went to go foreclose, and there was 3 other liens on the property that were each $1,000, so you paid an additional $3,000. You would be earning 18%. Now that may only be for 2 or 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Sometimes it can take, you know, between 2 to 6 months, maybe at the longest, for a county to go through the entire foreclosure process. But during that time, you're going to be earning 18% off of that additional liens that you purchased.
Yeah, which is really it's another way you can basically earn the maximum rate of return in the state. There is when you're going through foreclosure. So essentially, once that has happened for the tax deed auction, you know, the county's going to advertise that, although most of them are set up now with their own online auctions. And yeah, the opening bid is going to include everything that's owed in taxes and fees. The one exception to that is if you have a homestead property. Homestead properties, which those are properties that have the homestead exemption for taxes. So they're basically, the homestead exemption reduces their taxes, but they can only qualify for it if they're living in, you know, if it's an owner occupied property and it's their only residence. then they can qualify there for that homestead exemption. But when that happens, though, they automatically increase the minimum bid amount to half of what the estimated value of the property is, or half of the assessed value of the property. So if you're ever looking at the list and it seems like there is a property that has a very high opening bid, like it's half of what the assessed value is, chances are it's a homestead property, and that's why the opening bid amount is higher.
Yeah, and there's really not too many. I would say maybe 10% of the structured properties, maybe a little more than that. It doesn't happen as much, and there can still be value in purchasing that homestead property because it could be, well above the actual market value. Now, one thing to remember about Florida as well is that they want their payment pretty quick. So usually they're going to want it by the next day, which means that you're going to need to wire them the money, that day or the next morning to get them the funds in time. So that's something to think about as well, that they're going to want that money pretty quickly. Now, Florida has moved over to online auctions as well. There's still a handful of counties. In fact, we really have to work hard when we do buying tours out there to find the counties that are having the auctions, because most of them have moved over to online. A lot of them are using Real Auction. There's a few that are using Grant Street, but most of these auctions are online now, which is great for us because many of us don't live in Florida, and it gives us the opportunity to purchase property in those markets and participate in both tax lien and tax deed sales.
Yeah, nearly all of the tax deed auctions in Florida are online auctions. Like Steve was saying, there's only 1 or 2 counties that still hold on-site auctions. They're pretty much all online, which works really well for all of us that live out of state.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to go look at some Florida tax deeds. Like Shade said, everyone's under the impression that, you can't make money in Florida. We've had students that have made great money in Florida, even off of just land. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go look at some tax deed examples. Then we're going to go look at some tax lien examples after we get done with that. Okay. So the first property we're going to look at sold in Alachua County.
Oh yeah, by the way, credit cards, I think that most of the counties here, a lot of the counties in Florida now do take cards in one form or another with Real Auction, I think.
Yeah, they may be able to with the deposit. I think that the
they're not going to let you
transfer.
Yeah, they're not going to let you pay the full amount though with the credit card. They always make that by some form of wire transfer or check, bank check, something like that.
Yeah, so this property ended up selling in Gainesville, Florida. We can see it opened at $14,000, ended up selling for $50,000, and the county is assessed at about $151,000.
Yeah, which just based on that, it looks like they picked it up for a third of value, which is pretty good in terms of paying 33% of value. That's as competitive as you can get just about anywhere.
Oh, they do have 2 properties on there. I was wondering if that home behind there was included in there, and it is. We'll go ahead and take a look at it.
Oh, it's the property to your left, I think.
Yeah, it's this property right here. So I saw this one right here, and I was wondering if that one is included, and I think that it is. So it actually may have more value than what Redfin is assessing it at 186, because if it includes both of those homes, that could easily be worth an extra 50 or 100,000.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
We can see the photo.
It's interesting that they have the improvement data listed too in the assessment.
Yeah, you can see the first one is 860 square feet. The second one's 960 square feet. So this one was built in 61, effective 96. They must have done a rehab in 96, and this one was a little bit older. So it's including both of those homes. So really, this assessment of 100, or this value of 187, you can see that that's only taking it off that one home. So really, this was even a better deal than we thought it was. They picked it up for 50,000, and I'll bet it's worth 250.
Yeah, which that's an excellent deal. I mean, even at 187, they paid very low price there for the property. But if there's an entire house that's also not been counted, that's awesome.
Yeah. Now here's a condo I thought was kind of interesting. This is one that Shade found. here. In fact, a lot of these are ones that Shade was able to find. But this one here is a condo. You know, they ended up paying $70,000, and the assessed value is only 116. But when you look into what the market value is, and also what the rent value is, and also we're looking at a small condo. So as far as rehabbing, you know, it's only what, 360 square feet.
Yeah, it's like a studio apartment.
Yeah, 360 square feet. You know, here's some of the value. And as I was looking through the value, they're valuing and they're selling for about 150 to about 170,000 for these condos. So they paid up for it, but you also got to consider that they aren't, you know, they only have 360 feet that they're going to have to rehab. It's in a condo, so we're not worrying about roof or foundation issues. And chances are, even if it needs paint and carpet and all that, it's not going to be a major rehab job to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, it wouldn't cost very much to rehab, you know, and it will be relatively easy to sell. You know, I mean, there are a ton of condos that sell here in the area, and so yeah, it's something that you could turn around there relatively quickly. There are a lot of condos that sell throughout the Florida auctions, and they're, you know, they're probably some of the most competitive things that sell. So to find deals there where people actually, you know, made decent deals on condos is somewhat rare.
Yeah, it's right there on the beach, kind of on this island, you know, so a great location. And, you know, overall, I think that even though they paid up for it, in getting a condo like this, you still have the ability to make 70,000 on it. And, you know, here's one that was renting out for $2,500 a month. So even considering that, you pay 70,000 and you're making $2,500 a month, there's not a lot of rental homes you could do that with. You know,
Yeah,
if
well,
you're looking,
yeah, well, and $100,000 profit on a deal like that too, where you're only paying 70,000 is pretty good.
yeah, yeah, I think so as well. So there is deals happening, and this is even, you know, this is just south of Hollywood on Sun Isle Beach, Florida. So we're in a pretty hot location right there on the ocean. A lot of advantages to buying a condo like this.
Yeah, yeah, that was, so this is in Alachua County.
Did I do the same one twice?
Oh, you mean, did you click on it?
Hope I didn't. Oh, yeah, there we go. There's the right one. So this one ended up selling for 27,000, opened up at 10.
Yeah, that's always a sign too on good deals. At least a lot of times if the bidding doesn't bid up too high over, you know, over the opening bid amount, and so it opens up at 10, it sells for 27. That's not too bad.
Yeah, well, and we see that the market value is at 100, but this is actually the assessed value when I was looking at it, because I started looking at some of the comparables within the area. You know, you can see the information here, and you can see that 100 right there. But here are properties that are located right around it. And you can see that this is very similar property, about the same year built, about the same size, ended up selling for 224. This one's currently for sale for 220, similar style.
Yeah, so what these are, we're just reviewing examples here of properties that have sold in these counties here in recent months, and then kind of looking at what the deal was. So these are basically good deals that we tracked throughout the sales. You know, we're just looking at different sales here throughout Florida over, you know, the first half of this year, and that's kind of what we're looking at here. So this is an example here. This property that was picked up for 27,000 is an excellent deal. I can't believe how good of a deal that turned out to be. Way better. I mean, at least at 100,000, I thought it was a pretty good deal, but it turns out to be a lot better deal than even that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really, and that's the reason why we always stress looking into the market value. The market value is going to tell us a lot more. I mean, you know, this home is located right here, and you can see, you know, 224, 238, 250, 255, 250, 320, 215. These are all sales that have just taken place recently right around this location. And so, you know, this is really kind of pulling the assessed value through the county, or what they consider their market value, when the actual reality is it's probably worth closer to 200.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I thought it was, as I started looking more into that after you found, I was like, man, that's even a better deal than we thought it was.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising to see some of these deals because these aren't just like okay deals. I mean, a deal like that is a mega deal. I mean, to get a property at that kind of a price point, 27,000 that has the potential to be worth 200,000, that's insane. That's 10% of value. That's as good a deal as you can find anywhere. And so it's it's interesting that even a competitive state like Florida still has these deals, that will come out. That doesn't mean that other auctions aren't competitive. They can be highly competitive, but there are still deals to be had. And sometimes, they're not easy to recognize at a glance. You've got to dig into them a little bit to see what kind of a deal they really are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if we look at this one sold for 192, valued at 232. So this one had quite a bit more competition. Now maybe it's valued at 250 or 300, and there's a reason why, or it probably had to do with the condition. But here we're seeing a property that's valued at 136, like located within the same county, ended up selling for 38,000. It's pulling up. And it's a little bit more rural property. Well, it's not too rural, but it's a little bit outside of town a little bit. But, and kind of seeing what we can hear, still looks like the roof is okay. Somebody was still living there at the time. The market value at 195,000. So picking this home up, even if it needs some work, at 38,000 and valued at around 195,000, there's plenty of workable room there. You could still make easy $100,000 on this deal. This is a tax deed deal in Florida that didn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy, and you could still make an easy 100,000 on picking up a home like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you could do really well with a property like this. This was a steal, and I'm sure it's this is one of those properties that's hard to get good images of because it's back a little ways from the road, and so I don't know if that played a factor at all. It seems like sometimes it's just a numbers thing where if there are enough properties, sometimes certain properties just don't get as much attention, or for whatever reason the bidding doesn't quite go up as high.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another one. It only opened up at 10 grand, sold for 67,000. The county has assessed it at 66,000.
A 166, right?
Yeah, 166, excuse me. We can look into some of kind of the details here, see what it is, how many square feet it is. It was built in 1984, so it's not too old. They
Oh wait,
also
there's
have,
two buildings. Oh, is that two buildings?
this one doesn't have bedrooms and bath. It may be a garage. It says miscellaneous. See there,
Oh,
you can see the home.
so the home itself is 2005. It's kind of like a newer manufactured home.
Yeah, well, you can, yeah, exactly. You can see it's manufactured. So, and based on the size, it's probably, a double wide essentially. It's not your trailer. It looks like a modular home, and they have something out there as well that's about, 1,100 square feet. Maybe that's a
Yeah,
garage. It's a little bit more off in this area. So,
yeah.
it'll be a little bit harder to get an on-site evaluation for it.
Oh, the value's high though.
Yeah, they're valuing it at 236,000. It's got a nice
Oh,
big,
I didn't see that. The 12 acres.
12 acres, built in 2005. So we know we've got a more modern, you know, manufactured home, picked up for 67 grand, probably valued at around 230 at least. And kind of as I looked in the market, it definitely backs that up. In fact, I thought it could have even been worth more than that. Now with this one, it is going to be off a little bit. And so, we can see it's still within the county. Maybe a little bit harder to get an on-site evaluation for, but huge amount of value with a ton of land located on it as well.
Yeah, I mean that 12 acres is a big part of why the property, what a weird looking lot too. Um,
Well, it's good, they all were giving portion of the pond. That's so there's probably about what 5 acres of usable land,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest of it would be the pond. Let's get an idea of the imagery on it.
Oh,
Well,
the
I get,
pond's smaller now than it used to
yeah,
be.
yeah. But that is kind of nice, though. I mean, you've got this area right around here. They call it trout pond. I wonder if there's some actual fish in it.
Yeah, it's an interesting lot.
So again, pretty good deal picked up for, I don't know what the math is on that. 30 cents on the dollar, maybe 35
Yeah,
at the most.
yeah, or yeah, possibly even less, 25 cents on the dollar. Yeah, that's pretty good.
And this next one, now looking at this, if you were just looking at the numbers, you know, it doesn't look like that great of a deal. But as we look into it a little more, that's kind of where the details are on it. You can see it's a townhouse. So again, you know, we're not going to have to worry about the foundation. What year was this built? Where am I missing it?
Right there, 81.
1981. Obviously, we can't get a very good street view. And the one type of property that we may not need to get an on-site evaluation, in fact, sometimes we can't, would be an example like that condo. You know, we're not going to be able to get an on-site evaluation. You know, it's going to be inside. It's not going to make a difference. All you would see would be the door. So with those kind of properties, those are the few type of properties that we can make different types of determinations about it that we couldn't with just a normal single-family home. But still was picked up at 173,000. So, you know, there's still almost $100,000 worth of profit on this deal. And we're talking about a twin home, I guess a town home. You know, we can see kind of a photo of it there, what it looks like. And there's so much less risk in buying something like this than a home where, you know, we can't get an idea of what the condition looks like, because, you know, we're not going to worry about fire or something like that, at least in something like a condo, unless the whole condo, you know, lit on fire.
Yeah, this is really safe investment, you know, at the price point it's at, and it's a really profitable one. Considering normally like a condo or townhouse, generally they're not as profitable when at least in the tax sales, people pay more for them. So, you know, it can be more challenging. So to have, you know, close to $100,000 in potential profitability in a deal like this is excellent. You know, it's about as good as you can hope for.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty good deal. I mean, they could easily make 70 grand off of it.
Oh yeah, you know, Richard's saying that the yesterday's land auction in Washington County seemed like the bidding was getting out of control. You know, we ought to take a look at it. It's on Real Auction to see what the results were like. I'm sure that it probably was out of control. In fact, I saw it with. So I looked at a lot of counties yesterday in Florida, and one thing I found is in a lot of counties that have vacant land, there are investors there that bid, and they pretty much know about what the land can sell for, and they'll bid those properties up to like, you know, 3/4 of value. I mean, they're right up there to the line where it doesn't make sense, and you'll see that almost all the land that they sell in there kind of sells for about the same price point or close to it, you know, within like 10%, you know, you'll see. So I saw that with many of these counties here, and with properties like that, it's tough to make a deal because I think a lot of those properties are either bought by, you know, locals that are just looking for something to invest in, or they're bought by contractors, you know, that are willing to pay more for the property if they can just get a piece of land that they can start some kind of development on. And so, you know, it's hard to compete with them because they're planning on more profit down the road. You know, so you know, that's at least what we've run into when we're trying to bid against them is they are just a little bit too competitive and don't have the kind of profitability that we need.
Yeah, it's part of the reason we teach our membership how to do a pre-foreclosure on land. That's probably one of the best ways to be able to acquire land properties in Florida is picking them up before they actually end up selling at the auction, because a lot of the landowners have already given up on it. And so if they could make a couple of grand and realize it doesn't have to go to the tax sale, a lot of times they're going to be interested in selling it to you. In addition to that, you're going to get a warranty deed. So we don't have to go through that whole process of quiet title.
Yeah, no, the reason the counties might be out of control, at least the counties aren't out of control, it's the bidding that is kind of out of control. That's kind of what he means there. He's participating in an auction and the bidding prices are just going up above what would make sense. And that's something we've seen a lot of times before, but there are reasons for it. It doesn't help when you have a really strong real estate market where values are jumping up quickly, because buyers almost start to, they're counting on the appreciation of the property, you know, sometimes when they buy, and they'll pay a little bit more just because they know the properties are appreciating, which can make it even more competitive. With sales like that, I mean, in Florida, we've seen people pay practically like market prices in Florida, and they'll do that just because they have to win in some places, or because they want to win the property more than they want to make a lot of money on it. You know, that's probably the best explanation for why. But yeah, like any other auction we see get too out of control there, sometimes bidders just stop caring.
Yeah, well, in that case, we may choose a different county. In fact, I was actually looking at Washington County today before we got on, and I was noticing that myself. In fact, I was looking for deals that we could do, and those land deals were just bidding too high. Even looking at the market value, they were selling for 70% of market value. But I was able to find some structured properties over the last few months within that area that were still pretty good deals overall. Now, this one here ended up opening up for 9,300. It ended up selling for 70,000 with a assessed value of 165.
That looks pretty nice.
Yeah, really not too bad. Oh. And here's the property right now, and we always love when we can get photos, even if they're older photos. It can at least give us an idea of what the condition. So this is definitely going to need a rehab, but if it's in any shape like it's currently looking now, it's going to be probably a pretty good property to rehab, and at least some of the basics on it are still looking pretty good.
You know, one thing that was kind of interesting is I saw a couple of examples where you would have a property that sold in March for a certain amount is already listed on the market, and you can actually see what the profits are that they're looking to gain on it, because you kind of know what they picked it up for the tax sale, and you can see its current listing price. So there are sometimes we see that with properties there where they're turned around and somebody's trying to sell them like they're purchased by investors. In other cases, though, it's almost like maybe they're not purchased by investors, or the investors are planning to do a rehab or something on them before they list them, because they're not listing them here immediately.
Yeah, well, and I was kind of looking at the neighborhood. It's not a bad neighborhood. You've really got kind of a big lot. You've got some palm trees right there. This was back in 2022, and somebody was living in it. So when this photo was taken, this was actually an older photo. So they may have rehabbed it since this photo was taken, because this was back in 2016 and somebody's living in it now. So somebody bought it back then, and looking at it now, it very well could be, we can see that it was being lived in at this time, or at least it looks like it was. At that time, the roof still looked pretty solid. So they may have done some type of rehab since we saw it sell, 8 years ago or so.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, there are a couple of good questions everybody has here. Question on Google Earth, because I know Carrie was talking about the Google Earth images and the satellite images, and that's actually one question that we've had. So we're always trying to get the newest images we possibly can, and we found sometimes lately we go to look at the Google overhead images, and they're not always new. At least that's one thing that we found, is that sometimes they were giving us older overhead images. We used to think they were always the newest, but we've run into different cases there where they've been older images that they've kind of slipped in. But we use Google Maps for everything, and so
well, it's part of the reason why we always check the GIS map, because many times we can check by different years, and that's going to give us a better idea. In fact, many times I'll have a newer image on the GIS map than I will with Google Maps. Now, the street view, we can get a good idea when that was taken, but they don't always have unless you're using the Google Earth function. If you're just using Google Maps, we don't know exactly when that overhead was taken. So we're going to use both of them to kind of get an idea, and then use the street side to get an idea of what the condition was at that time.
You know, another question was, is Craigslist, a reliable source for handyman stuff or on-site evaluation or basic rehab work? And yeah, I would say that it depends on the location. There are some places that don't use so much Craigslist, other places that use it completely. And so I would say the majority of the time, it's always going to be used at least to some degree. But it depends on areas. We've seen areas before that where everybody in town basically operated off Craigslist. And then we've gone to other places where it was less used, but they still have listings and stuff that you can still get stuff sold. But for some places, though, I mean, that is the main source they use for getting out jobs like taking photos or side projects.
Yeah, exactly. So this one here ended up selling for 70 grand. They're valuing it at around 183. So, in that type of value margin, there's still, even if we put in $30,000 to rehab, we could still make $70,000 or $80,000 on this. And we could also look into see what this type of property would sell for once it's been rehabbed. And there's a chance that it could be worth higher value than that. This is always just going to be a range, on what the value is. I mean, looking right down there below, that looks pretty similar, and it sold for 285. This one here, even a little bit quite a bit smaller, sold for 179. So, and looking at these,
that thing just said it. Go back to that last page just for a second there that you were at. Yeah, right there. It said that this home's estimate is 19.5% lower than the average sales price of 228,000. So it's about 20% lower than the average. So it probably would go up.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason why it's so important to look in the market values, because they're saying that, like Shade said, this is almost 20% lower than what homes are actually selling for within the area.
Yeah, another really good deal. I mean, anytime you have these deals where there's 100,000 plus in the margin, you've got as good a deal as you could get anywhere in the country.
Yeah, definitely. We'll look at a few more. Here's one that sold in the Jacksonville area. So this is in Duval County. Opened up for 14, sold for 49, has a county assessed value of 146. And you can see that the property does need some work, but still picked up at a pretty good deal, valued at 150,000.
Yeah, it's a brick home. It's nice and simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty simple. I mean, picked up for 50 grand, and overall has $100,000 worth of profit. Again, you could make $60,000 to $70,000 on this type of deal after going through the rehab process.
Yeah, in which the value could go up on it as well.
Oh, definitely. This one here. Ended up selling for quite a bit, but I looked a little bit more into this and found out some more details. So we can, it looks like it sold for 120,000, only opened up at 15. The county's valued it at 195,000.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, definitely could be cleaned up, but overall in a pretty good. And one thing that was so interesting about this is look at all of these new homes that are around here. In fact, I'm going to go for this home. Here's where this one is. That's what's so interesting. We'll look at it here in a second. And that home right there is about just sold at for 660,000.
Holy cow!
So the county, I mean, Redfin is valued at 245,000. So it was picked up at 120. Redfin's valued at 245. But then I started looking a little bit more into the market. Now here's just a building lot that's only 5,000 square feet. So this is a pretty small lot compared to what this property's on. and it sold for $145,000. This lot right here is about the same size, and these are all located within a block or two because there's so much new building going on within this area. Look at that, sold for $305,000 for just the lot.
That's crazy. The lot is valued higher than the house is.
And this is a block away from this property. And there's that property that was across the street.
You know, this could be imagine rehabbing this property. This could be a property where you could probably do a rehab and increase the value pretty dramatically if you did a nice rehab on it.
Yeah, now this is a brand new home, you know, this particular one, but there's so many homes that are being built within this area. In fact, here's where it's located. You can see the home right there. Look at all of these sales around here. You know, 660, 535, 715, 818, 540. You know, and these ones that are lower are the lots. You know, you can't find a lot in here that's not at 150,000. So they picked up this home for cheaper than they could have bought a lot. And you have all of these new construction properties that have been built within this area within the last year or two. So any remaining lot is getting a new home put on it, which is only bringing up the value of this older home, you know, once you went ahead and rehabbed it, because it's going to be surrounded by brand new homes.
Wow, Pensacola is going crazy.
Yeah. So, you know, as you really look into this, yeah, you know, Redfin's showing it valued at $245,000. I think you've got to at least put another 100,000 on there. You know, probably close, if it was rehabbed nicely, to, you know, 350 to 400,000.
You know, it's a good question. You know, what do you think, you know, that area of Pensacola, why do you think it is so hot? What do you think is going on with it?
I didn't get a chance to look more into it other than just looking what was going on right around this home. So we'd probably have to do a little bit more research, but I couldn't believe how many new homes were being purchased, what the lots were selling for. And so there's definitely something that's going on. And that's what we'd look a little bit more into to figure it out. But there's these kind of deals out there that if you're willing to look into the market, if you're willing to evaluate the home, where, you know, everyone may just think it's worth 245,000, but as we really look into the market within this area, you know, it's easily worth over $100,000 more than what they're assessing it at, or what the Redfin's valuing it at.
You know, something that comes to mind for me at least is that Pensacola has been around for a long time and it's been fully developed for a long time. But everybody would love to have, you know, a house out there in Pensacola, but they don't want old houses, you know, they want new houses. And so you have this land explosion there in terms of land value because there are limited places to build there, you know, very limited places to build. And that's why they can charge, you know, 170,000 for 5,000 square feet of land and 300,000, you know, for a regular lot. You know, that's probably really where the explosion has happened is with the building process. I think Steve's nailed it down pretty well, you know, in that it's these new constructions, you know, that people are really after, and it's the land that has all the value. I mean, in some ways, this property would be more valuable just as a piece of land ready to build something on than it would be as a house. That's insane.
Well, I think there's still, because I was looking through even the used homes, you know, the older homes that are similar, they were still selling at 400 grand. So, you know, I think that this would be a home that we wouldn't do what we call lipstick rehab on. In fact, it could even be worth looking at doing an addition, you know, really making it a little bit nicer where, you know, maybe you put in, I mean, even if they spent, you know, they spent 120, let's say they put in, you know, an additional $100,000 into it. So they did a really nice rehab. Maybe they extended it, gave it an extra room, an extra bathroom. You know, in that case, I think it's easily going to sell within the $400,000 range, because that's still going to be $200,000 cheaper than the house across the street. And it's, you know, at that point, it could be completely rehabbed and a nice home.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, yeah, Carrie's saying that, Carl was saying that Pensacola is where the U.S. Navy is. And that's probably what originally, you know, the market was probably based on there. And it's probably what a lot of this old construction was originally was for military housing, but now it's just worth so much.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and look at one more. Now, this one was kind of interesting, and I threw it on here at the end just because to talk a little bit about the foreclosure market. The regular bank foreclosure market is exploding right now. And, tax sales is our favorite method at purchasing property. And if you know how to invest into tax sales, you can do the research to invest in to buy bank foreclosures. Now we need to go through some additional steps because they don't go through that judicial foreclosure, but there still could be good deals out there. And as we're going through and looking at the tax sales in a state like Florida, it can be worth looking at some of the bank sales as well. So this home right here opened up at 10,000, ended up selling for 100,000, and this is one of the counties that offer both tax deeds and tax and bank foreclosures on the same sale. But we can see the county has valued it at 444,000.
Holy cow, what a deal.
So it's this unit right here. In fact, let's click on, and we need to find out what debts are on it or anything like that. But still, you're not going to be worrying about, grass cut liens on a property like this because it's a twin home or a town home. So you're not going to be worrying about any of those kind of things that you normally would if you were looking at just a normal, home type property. You can kind of see what it looks like down here. And here's the property, on Redfin, which we can include, included with some interior photos as well.
Wow. I can't believe they got that. I mean, it's interesting that it opened up for $10,000 just because you would think it would have, a big mortgage on it, and that's what it would be going to foreclosure for. But it wasn't. It was for a fairly small amount. So that is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting as well. Well, and I was wondering maybe it's the HOA fees, but if there was a bank loan against it, the bank would have stepped in, to make sure that they didn't lose this home. So I'm not sure why it started at such a low amount. I didn't get time. I just put it on the last minute right before we got on. But that's kind of my thinking, and we'd have to look into it. But maybe it was an HOA that foreclosed on it, and this home didn't have a mortgage, and so the bank didn't step in to take care of it before the HOA, before the HOA foreclosure took place.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, again, kind of an interesting something to think about as we're looking at tax sale properties, especially as more of these bank foreclosures are coming to the auction block. Those can be worth looking at as well.
Yeah, that's a fantastic deal. It's interesting here that that is a bank foreclosure. And yeah, I've heard there are record numbers of foreclosures right now, that it is a huge market. And so that's definitely flooding the market. There's gonna be less people available to do it, but 100,000 paid out for a $500,000 property is incredible.
Yeah. So there's definitely deals in Florida, guys. I'll go ahead and pass this back to you, Shade, and we'll look at some tax and certificate auctions that are coming up.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for doing this here. All right, that looks correct. Excellent. Here we've had some more really good questions here. And you know what? We'll talk about getting potentially a list of HOAs list. Although foreclosure, they really are. The foreclosure market is really the best place to look for a lot of stuff because it's going to include every type of foreclosure. That's a non-judicial foreclosure and judicial foreclosures because they're including the tax sale properties in many cases. But those foreclosures, though, it's by law they kind of have to go through the county there, and so you're always going to get a good shot at every single property that's coming up like that, including HOA stuff. Now,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, in some cases in Florida, they'll have the foreclosure auctions on a different website or a different day. Sometimes they'll have them on the same day, but it's not just Florida this is happening. That's one thing that is different about foreclosures than maybe a tax deed foreclosure is if you live in Arizona, you're not going to be able to invest in tax deed foreclosures because they're a tax lien state. But within that area, if you live in Arizona, you could still participate in the mortgage foreclosure auctions or the bank auctions, and there could still be good deals that come out of those auctions. And if you know how to invest it and do the research, do the 3 stages of due diligence that we talk about, in the members' webinars, then you're going to have the skills to be able to go through and do the due diligence on a bank sale.
Yeah, it really is. It is the same process here. And the only difference is when we go to look for liens, we're going to look for other financial liens that would exist too. That's literally the primary difference is we just need to know about the other liens that exist against the property. And there are lots of opportunities. There's way more bank foreclosures than there are tax sale foreclosures, by an order of magnitude of probably 10 or 20. There's just so many bank foreclosures that come through in most counties. So tons of opportunities there.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some Florida tax lien certificates. So we know today's been obviously Florida focused, but we thought it was worth talking about. We have a lot of students that live in Florida. We have a lot of investors that are interested in Florida. And so we thought it was good to go over both the tax deed opportunities and the tax lien certificate auctions that are happening right now. So if you are interested in tax liens, now's the time to get started. In fact, sometimes me and Shade will look in counties that maybe might have a little bit less competition. We talked about the 3 different services out there. Sometimes I've seen some great interest rate returns on tax lien auctions in that tax certificate auction. That different website, they're kind of like the, I don't know what to say, the value brand of,
It was like discount.
Yeah, the discount, of Real Auction or Lien Hub. And so in that case, we've seen great deals in there. Now they may be a little bit more rural county, but 95% of the time, you're going to get your money back anyway without even going to the tax deed sale. And in Florida, you're not going to get the property anyway. So if it's a good property and it goes to the auction, it's definitely going to sell for at least the opening bid amount, which means that you're going to get paid back your money and your interest rate return.
Yeah. And Carl, I'll see if I can grab the information here, or if you want information, you can also email me at send me your email at shade@taxsalesupport.info. Send me an email there, and I'll be able to send you over anything from there. I'm afraid I won't have the chance to write it down. Now, what we're looking at right here, this is Real Auction, which they do a lot of the tax. They do tax deed sales there for Florida and some other states. They also do tax lien sales for several states. We can see we mentioned how Colorado is now a state that utilizes tax deed applications. This is for their liens that they have. Their lien sales that they do. And here we have for Florida and their lien sales. And one thing you'll notice is all of these Florida liens sales open, either they've just opened or they open in the next week. And so let's go down here and look at a few of these. Some of them are big counties, some of them are small counties. And we have some small counties like, for instance, Lafayette here. And so one of the things, we're going to go and look here at the preview items, but if you need information about the sale, what you want to do actually is you go over to the bidding rules right here, and you scroll down from here. Here's where they have the most important information, and a lot of it you can find right here in the summary, of important information, like for instance the date. So the actual date of the auction in this case is on June 1st. But they have the other things like the bidding begins as of today, and deposit though is required by the cutoff is the 22nd. So you've got a couple of weeks here before the deposit is required to be in, and then the auction will take place here on the 1st. Now, if we go over and preview the items here, Lafayette's a smaller county. They've got 529 liens that are available, which is not that many compared to some of the counties that have 28,000 or 30,000, which we'll see some of the counties that have that. The majority of the liens, though, the majority of new liens are going to be good, good investments, or are good. Basically, they're good liens against good, valuable properties.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting. That's actually one of the smallest tax lien lists in Florida I've ever seen.
Yeah, it is. It's a very small sale compared to most of them. And if we click on one here, so this is like an $800 lien that we're looking at, we can see that it is utilizing this improved property. It looks kind of like maybe a farmland or something like that. And we could go off of their values there. What we'd probably do is we can see it includes 1.86 acres and it's a mobile home. We'd probably just get the address, which would be right there, and use that to kind of set our value on the property. But at $800, the property wouldn't have to have too much value for the lien to be highly secure. That is one thing we're always asking. Our question is what percentage of value does this lien represent? And the lower the percentage of value, obviously, the more the more secure the lien is. So when we click, Palm Beach County is another county here that has an auction here. I think their sale ends on the 27th. So it ends a little bit earlier. They're one of the first that actually end, but they have 23,567 liens. So they've got tons of liens. Now you can see one thing that's interesting is you can see different tax years. And in some cases, we have tax years of 2024, which would, I think, be the most recent on this list. But some of these also have liens or represent tax years that are a little bit older, like that, like 2020, 2021, or these few here that are at 2022.
I wonder if those are over the counters.
I don't know. Let's pull one up and see what it tells us here. Oh, this one's on a house, it looks like. Yeah, a house here that was built in 1980. It's about 1,400 square feet, 1,436.
I'm gonna have to look into that after we're done, because it doesn't make sense to me why they would be having a lien from 2021 in the 2026 tax sale.
Yeah, now when we have questions like this, what we usually want to understand is we want to understand kind of what the tax history is here on the property. This is actually helpful because we can see what the total amount owed. There's your total amount owed on the property. So there are some over-the-counter liens here that are available, and you can see that the roll-up actually goes. So we are only looking there on that lien that we were just clicked on. It was like $2,800, right? And that $2,800 though is only 10%, less than 10% of what the actual total foreclosure cost on this property is. It's all the way up to $32,000 and includes tax years dating back to 2020. So we haven't had any of these that have actually, let's look. So 2019 was last year paid. We haven't had any that have dropped off because they've got too old. Some of these are earning interest though. You can see how much interest this one. So the original amount was like $3,700, and this thing has earned $2,000, $2,059 in interest over that time period. Oh, look at that though. They paid $3,100 though. So that was actually the last payment that was made was for $3,100, which lowered that tax bill down. And that's the lane that we're looking at right now, I think.
Yeah, this is a really weird one. This isn't your normal tax lien, because you can see where it says certificate, but then it says past due. I mean, unless they've been doing an on-site auction and this is their first year doing an online auction, I don't know why you would have all of these tax liens that essentially look like there's a tax. Well, I guess there's a tax lien in 23, but there's not one in 24.
Let's see what the value of the property is real quick. Let's just grab the location address and let's just see if the value is there. Because if the property's valued at what it probably is, probably pretty high, then what's puzzling Steve and I a little bit is just why the liens wouldn't have been purchased before if they're against a property, that has good value, which, it looks like it's a house. Oh, is there no street side? Is it a gated community? It must be, or they haven't been in here yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, well, that's all right. We've got the address. Let's just see what the value is.
One thing we'd do as well is we'd check the GIS map just to make sure. And it doesn't look like it is. We can see probably an assessment if there's improvement value, but we did a bad deal review on one of the podcasts a while back where some individuals in Florida thought they were buying a condo or not a house, but they were actually just buying a thin strip of land between it, because there's something going on with this tax lien that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
in fact,
yeah. Even more confused now because this thing's valued pretty high.
Yeah, let's look at more of a kind of a normal one.
All right, let's pull up some other one here. So the other ones, if we're to look at, so most of these liens, even if we're looking at, let's pull up this one right here for $7,000 on a 2024. In this case, we're also looking at, now this one is what is this, a condo? I think, yeah, pretty big though, 2,500 square feet.
It says single
Or
family under the property code.
3,300. Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's just a single family. It just looked like it was.
It's
Oh
just a
yeah,
thin lot.
yeah. It is just a thin lot, but a very valuable house. So that makes sense. And if we were to go and kind of look here at the same thing, will help us understand whether this $7,000 is all that's owed. Is this a first year tax lien, or is this just one of multiple liens? And let's see what we can see here. Oh, this one has past due taxes too.
What county are we looking in?
Palm Beach. Let me go down here and look and see if all these properties, they shouldn't, at least most of the properties we looked at here before. Now that looks like the first one I clicked on here. Let me click off a few of these here so I'm not getting the issue here with these things coming up, repopulating. Okay, all right, this one's a condo and pretty good value to it here. Okay, so this one looks more normal. All right, this is for 2024. You have 1 year of taxes that are owed. It's a $4,000 and like $4,800 lien, and we can see everything here makes sense. So we can see the initial tax amount was $44.74. There's been about $380 of interest that's owed on it so far, but that's a more straightforward lien. Most of them don't have all these. At least you're not normally going to see multiple years of liens on good properties because they usually sell. If there are liens that are available, I mean, if those other liens were available, what we don't understand is why somebody didn't buy them already.
Go down to the bottom where you can go to a page and go to page 50. Or just where, yeah, see, this is where we need to be. Those first ones there's something weird going on with those first ones. I don't know what it is because I was thinking, why is it showing 2024? It should show the tax year from 2025 because it's a 2026 year tax sale.
Yeah, it was showing us the over-the-counter stuff essentially first, or at least I don't know, stuff that was not purchased. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah, we've got this one here, which is also a condo. They got valued at 65,000 is what they're saying. This is also a much smaller lien. It was like a lien amount I clicked on was like $1,300, I think. And yeah, so here this also makes sense. It's just a single lien, which some of those others were also just single amounts, but this is what would tell us at least what the roll up is going to be on the property and how many other liens may exist. So in this case, we know this is the only lien that exists against the property. If we were to buy it, this would be a first year lien. Some of those others had first year lien. The first year lien was actually like a 2020.
Yeah, there's something going on with that, but you can see that there's 23,000 tax liens available just within this county. And so, sometimes when we're looking at property, if we see a $200,000, home and a $200,000 piece of, let's say, commercial land, and we can earn, 16% off the land or 6% off the home, a lot of times we're going to go with the home because we're not going to own it anyway. So when you're looking at Florida and some of the states like that, Colorado, don't look at it like I'm going to own this property. Just look at what's going to be the best investment on your money. If I can earn 16% on land that's valued just as much as a home, then many times I'm just going to go ahead and buy that tax lien on the land because I'm not going to own it anyway. And what I'm most interested in is getting the highest interest rate I can.
Yeah, and all of these are very safe investments here. All of these are first year investments. In fact, I'm sure if we're looking at this list, the majority of the ones from 2025 for 2025 taxes are probably going to be just first year liens.
Click on a couple of big ones.
Let's see, 32,000. Let's look at that. This one looks like a commercial property of some kind. It's on Military Trail Road. Look at that, valued like $2 million. And 7,000 square feet. It's a small discount store, yeah.
Yeah, it's retail. go down to the improvement value, kind of the so 1.7 million.
Yeah.
And really what we do with tax lien certificates is we go through stage 1 due diligence, plus we check the roll up. So when we talk about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, usually stage 1, if we go through and do good stage 1 due diligence search on it, then we're going to have a good idea of what the value is. We're not going to go through and do a full comparative market analysis on something like a home or something like that if we're just buying the tax lien, because if it's only 1% of the property's value, chances are the owner's going to pay it off. If not, it's going to get sent to the deed sale, and that's when we'll make our return.
Yeah, that's kind of the situation with this property here, where you've got a property that's valued at least $2 million, probably more than that, probably $2 or $3 million, and a lien amount that is about $30,000 right now. Probably represents 1%, maybe 1.5% of the property's, overall value, if even that. Now, I'm not sure if it's even that much, but a very small percentage of value, so very secure investment. And we can see it's a first-year lien as well, and so if there were subsequent opportunities, you might even get a chance to buy those.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. This is a big auction.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a humongous auction. Let's look at the one for 54,000. Which is our last one to check out.
And one thing that may be a junk, if that's the actual law, or maybe I'm not seeing the whole thing. I just saw a line there. I was thinking it was. I was just thinking it was just a small strip of land, but no.
Yeah, this is 10,000 square feet. It's like a financial, like a bank, I think is what it says it is. Most of it built in 77, I think. And
it's worth almost $3 million.
Yeah, it is valued pretty high. And we can see from just the amount, they pay like 50,000 a year in taxes. And so this is probably going to be the only taxes that are owed here on it. But we'll know here in just a second. But it's always a good idea, though, to get in the habit of kind of checking out properties like this. Oh, look at that. It's not the only lien. So they owe all these past years here for this one as well.
No, look, they did a tax deed application, but they paid it.
Oh, yeah, they did. It redeemed. So it was going to foreclosure and it just got paid off. Yeah, those are all paid.
So what this shows us is that this is a property that has had a history of being delinquent. And last time in 2023, when somebody filled out the tax deed application, they paid it between when the tax deed application was filed and when the actual foreclosure took place at the tax deed auction took place. So chances are they're probably going to pay us back. And we can kind of get an idea. So that's the reason why looking at the record can kind of tell us something more about what's going on with the properties. Is a first-year lien? Have they had a history of liens that they pay off before it goes to the tax sale in that tax deed application time period?
That's crazy.
Look at that interest, $26,000 of interest earned.
Yeah, that is. It's quite a bit of interest here that's been earned. Well, and essentially what they're adding at this point is you'd have to pay, the tax deed application fee plus the taxes for 2025, or basically is what makes up the total fee.
Yeah, well, and they paid it in 2023, and it looks like they probably paid their property taxes in 2024 because we don't see a 2024 lien. But then they went ahead, and you can see they were paid off there in 2024. So they had the tax deed application happen, the tax deed foreclosure happened in 2023. They ended up paying the property taxes in 2024, and now in 2025 taxes, they were delinquent again.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of good questions here. Is there a minimum or maximum percentage you would recommend since we're bidding down the interest on tax liens? That is a good question. I don't know if we have a set number that we would say. I mean, really, any interest rate, where you're earning anything around 10% is a pretty good overall interest rate return. So you can bid down the rates, but a lot of it kind of comes down to what you personally want, because you don't always have to give up a lot of interest. I mean, there are lots of liens that will bid down to almost nothing. And, they do that because, well, sometimes
5%
I think
penalty makes a difference.
Yeah, the 5% penalty probably is a big part of the reason why. Sometimes you'll see bidders that bid down the interest to almost nothing or even nothing. And so, yeah, I don't know if we have a recommendation here in terms of your minimum interest rate return, because you'll make money in a lot of other ways. So I guess the one thing we will say is just this, don't get so set on a specific property, that you're willing to give away all your interest when a similarly valued property might have a much better interest rate return. So, sometimes the homes, might go for the practically no interest at all. And other properties that have good value may have a much better interest rate return. So that's the main thing we would say, is just to look for opportunities to earn higher interest rates on similar properties, because the vast majority of these all redeem anyway.
Yeah, and everyone's, return, what's an acceptable return to them is going to be different. There's investors, if they can make 6 or 7%, that's going to be good with them. They're going to also look at that 5% penalty. And then there's other investors that are going to want, 10 or 12 or 15%. So there's always going to be some type of bidding, but as you look in different areas, and there's a lot of liens here, the way that this works is you're going to put down 10% of what you plan on investing, and then it'll bid on your behalf. So you're not going to earn or buy more tax liens than you can essentially afford, or what you've included within your deposit. And so because of that, our recommendation is to bid on as many tax liens as you can. Just because you're giving yourself a better chance to be able to get one of those at the interest rate that you want. Shade, I sent you a couple of links. I don't know, we can click on them if we want to or not, but these are just two of the other organizations out there that offer tax liens. Now, this is the one that we kind of called the value store, kind of your dollar store tax sale provider. And you can see here over on the left the different counties that use this. And there's Washington. We were talking about Washington earlier. You can click on any of them to see what their auction is and when it's starting and what's required.
Oh yeah, look at, so some of these, they should have a list out by now. I wonder how do you get their list?
I can't remember if you have to be registered. You might have to be registered. I also sent over Lien Hub too, and that's one of the big ones.
Oh, let's see, let me click on
In fact, they actually have more counties than Real Auction does for the tax lien sales. And over on the left-hand side, you can see the different counties. So right now, you can see all of the different counties that use this system. And there's more within Lien Hub than there is even in Real Auction.
Yeah, there are so many there. Look at all the counties there in Lien Hub, and they've got the full list that's here as well. Different style of list, but you can see what's nice too is they tell us right there whether it's homestead or not, so you don't have to guess. You kind of know that certain properties are homestead, which makes it a little bit easier here. And let's see what they provide here link wise. Oh, this is handy too. So I like previews like this, because what they do is they show us the information we need to see. So like what the face amount of it is, what the property is assessed at. And usually they'll show us here, yeah, down here we can see if there are prior certificates that are issued, if there's any of these that are outstanding, if any of them have been redeemed. So we can kind of tell just at a glance, by clicking on these things, what is going on, with properties, and we automatically know. So you look at that, there's 3 prior liens here, on this one, and we also see the average months for the prior liens was about 12 months.
Yeah, and up at the top, you can click on the tax record or the property card or the details or the Google map. So they're providing some pretty good links there as well that we can use to look into additional research on the property to determine exactly what it is, and some more details before determining if it's a property that we'd like to bid on.
Yeah, these Lien Hub lists are pretty nice to work with. They're nice and easy that way. Yeah, like we can see here, we have one other certificate that's outstanding, prior year that redeemed. And look at that, they redeemed after 2 months, so this one will probably redeem quickly.
Yeah, and even that tells us something, because if we do get that 5% penalty, then even if it redeemed after 2 months, we're going to at least make 5%. Or if we redeem that next month.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are all good investments here. In fact, I lost where I was at here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, the Lien Hub sales are pretty good. And I think these, in some ways, they're easier to work with than the Real Auction sales. At least the lists are. I like the lists for Lien Hub better because they seem to work better. And the other one we were talking about here was it is taxcertsale.com. You know, it's like in fact, I'll tell you what, I'll put a link down there in the chat section for people if they are interested in it.
Yeah, and if you are a member, we'll have these listed as well on the auction calendar and also within the online auction tab.
Yeah, there we go. I posted that there in the chat section here. Let me also post it here. There we go. Yeah, they're in the question section. I responded there with tax cert sale on those ones. And then the other one we're dealing with is Lien Hub. And I'll give you a link here for Lien Hub as well. I think it's just lienhub.com though.
But hopefully that gives you guys, as far as how Florida works, what opportunities are available there. And with this many different taxing certificates, you know, some areas are going to be more competitive. And some properties are going to be more competitive. Even within more competitive markets, or, you know, you can still find liens that you're going to be able to get a lot better interest rate than other type of tax liens.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and like Greg is saying here, you know, do check for flood zones. That's always something to check for. If you're, especially with land purchases, you've got to be careful with land, you know, to make sure it doesn't exist here in a flood zone. You know, and fortunately, we can usually figure that out now with zoning maps, or not zoning maps, but GIS maps. Oftentimes in our layers there, we've got floodplain maps that will help us understand where those properties are at. But yeah, these Lien Hub lists are awesome. You know, they're nice and easy to work with and give us all of the valuable information. I mean, look, you know, there have been 7 previous liens that have been issued. There's still 7 that are outstanding. So this property has 7 liens against it. This one might be one where it has some problems.
Yeah, definitely look into before bidding on it. Click on the property.
Look at the size. It's commercial, but it's 0.02 acre.
Yeah, so when I see 7 liens there, that click on the tax record. You know, it's going to give us an idea that that's automatically, if there was liens purchased, nobody has decided to foreclose on it yet. And the question is why? You know, if it's 3 years worth of tax liens, maybe it's just a kind of lazy investor, so to speak. You know, but as we're getting into 7 years, that's automatically a red flag. You know, why hasn't anyone foreclosed on the property yet?
Well, that's weird. See here, we have all of the unpaid. So that's the total amount owed here is about $2,000 on the property. But you know, it is kind of a lot though, considering that you have all these past due liens here that are fairly old. But you notice that they can't charge anything beyond, you know, this one here in 2018, because then it drops off after the 7 years.
Yeah, in fact, there is investors that did buy them. Because look, I mean, you can see they didn't buy that one, but somebody bought that one at 17.75, and then somebody paid got that one for 7% and 8.5%. So somebody was actually bidding on these. These are liens that somebody bought that's pretty much a junk lien.
Yeah, yeah,
We'd
and they
know
still,
more by looking at the property card, but yeah.
yeah, they still could end up redeeming too if somebody ends up paying this off. But it's just such a small piece of commercial property that I have to wonder.
You can click on the interactive map to get a better idea, I think.
Yeah, it looks like it kind of looks like a junk property. It's certainly going to be too small for anything.
No, I mean, it is tiny. What is that, 10 feet by 30 feet? I don't even know if
Yeah,
it's that.
yeah, it's 0.018 acres, so it's not. I mean, yeah, it is tiny. They don't tell you the square feet, but it's not very many, and it's also not being used for anything. It's never been cleared, so it wouldn't meet zoning requirements for use, I doubt. If they have any kind of minimum size requirement, but yeah, it can't really be used for anything. That's a junk property.
Well, look at it. It's one little lot inside. Look at the surrounded by a big lot. The only thing I could think that if you owned it, I would never buy the tax lien. But if you owned it, maybe you could put up a billboard. But even that, you know, is who knows if you could or not.
Yeah,
But that's
yeah,
the only use I could see with it.
yeah, very interesting. Well, it's a good time of the year to participate in lien sales because again, these are going to earn, great rates of return here overall, and they're very safe. Again, if you're even checking things, that you're buying here before you buy, you're gonna be able to make very safe investments on all of these properties. Liens in general tend to be very safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you can get an idea, like we saw that one, we could tell pretty quick there was something going on with it. Looking at what the assessed value is, looking at the past liens, automatically that's going to be a red flag. We're going to avoid that because there's so many other liens that we can choose.
Yeah. But yeah, I think let me switch back over here. I think
we'll finish up if we have any other questions before we go ahead and call it a night. But again, thank you guys for being on with us. Thank you for asking questions. We enjoy doing these podcasts, and we appreciate you guys spending the time with us this evening to talk about tax sales and look at some of the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, really, it has been fun, and we do love having you on. Doing this this weekly podcast has actually been pretty enjoyable. It's my favorite training to do every week, just because it does have a lot of variety to it. And so, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your great questions and all of the compliments and nice words. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you guys, and have a good night.
Thank you. We'll see you later.